Welcome to this episode of the podcast. I just had a great conversation with Blaine Ames. He is the head of people research and analytics at Atlassian. He's been in the discipline for 15 plus years. He's been at Barclays, AAA Insurance, and he's been leading people analytics at Atlassian for the past 5 years. You may know Atlassian as the owners of Trello and Jira, among other solutions. Blaine talked about so many things that are directly applicable and inspiring. For example, collaborative analysis, engaging your internal customers in doing the analysis, intentional togetherness. He talked about when we silo data, it's like looking at dynamics through a straw. And that was a very poignant element of what he brought out today. And there's so many other. He talked about language and how they define teams and how it's fluid. So I hope you enjoy today's episode. Follow us at pafal.net. Join the community. Follow us on Spotify, YouTube, LinkedIn, of course, and get involved. We're doing events around the country, all leading into our conference next year here in the San Francisco Bay Area. It'll be early February, and more information will come out soon. Again, at pafal.net. So enjoy my discussion with Blaine, and talk soon. Blaine, how you doing?
I'm good, Al. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm here with Blaine Ames, longtime friend and colleague. If you would introduce yourself and a little bit about what you're doing there at Atlassian.
Thanks. Yeah. So, Blaine Ames, and so I lead the people analytics team at Atlassian right now. I've been here about 6 years and joined when Atlassian was just 1,200 employees. We just broke the 9,000 mark and looking to go all the way to 25 to 30,000 over the next 5 years. So leading the team across everything from employee research, qualitative research, as well as advanced analytics, reporting, dashboards, et cetera.
Well, Blaine, you've been at this for quite a while now, and you were formerly here in the Bay Area with AAA. You've moved back recently. Full disclosure, Blaine lives right over there. We're both in Santa Cruz, but we decided to do this virtually. But if you would, I mean, there's so much for us to talk about: people analytics, workforce planning, the nature of work itself, both at individual levels and organizational levels. But before we get into that, would you share a little bit about your journey, where you grew up, your educational background, all that?
Yeah, definitely. I don't know that it's been as circuitous as, many people's journey into people analytics, but I actually grew up just on the other side of the hill here in San Jose. So kind of grew up in Silicon Valley with HP in my backyard and IBM and, Stanford, all of the startups, et cetera. Went to Oak Grove High School just down the street. And while I was there, actually, sort of, it kind of goes all the way back to, my teenage years. Really deep interest in psychology, philosophy, science in general. At that time, I wanted to be a marine biologist, which didn't happen. But, the sciences, math, all that stuff was always really interesting to me. And so bringing together the science along with psychology and philosophy, it actually brought me to UC Berkeley for my undergrad, where I studied cognitive neuroscience. And that was an opportunity to really understand the mind, how it works through all sorts of disciplines. So it was this very multidisciplinary approach through psychology, neuroscience, anthropology, linguistics, artificial intelligence, all of that. So I had to take classes across a really broad swath of topics. And through that, I really sort of dove deep into the research side of things. And so actually, my initial plan out of undergrad was to study neuroscience and go get a PhD in neuroscience. But I wasn't quite ready to commit to a PhD at that point. So I took the opportunity to continue the research, moved out to Colorado, and worked at the University of Colorado in Boulder to do basically fMRI research. So that's functional magnetic resonance imaging taking brain scans while people are doing activities, to understand what parts of the brain. And all of that, though, sort of revolved around this idea of networks and connections and sort of how things are working within a system. Ultimately, that's kind of what I realized is systems and connections and networks was something that was always really interesting to me. Um, I also, while there, got an opportunity to be sort of the local lab IT guy. So I was setting up servers, I was building computers, I was helping to kind of create a network, an internal network of data analysis, data storage, and all of that. And so through that process, though, realized neuroscience PhD probably wasn't for me. One of the key things that I also recognized was that the professors and the grad students were all fighting for funding, spending their time writing grant proposals, working 24/7, all to publish research that may or may not be consumed by the public or actually end up helping somebody. So
Mm-hmm.
um, I wanted to make a pivot. I started exploring kind of in a similar space what there was out there, and I kind of landed on applied psychology. At the time, that was sort of IO psychology. Applied psychology was really the space. People analytics, this is early 2000s, wasn't really a thing yet. And so I took an opportunity and moved out to New York, to NYU to get my master's in IO psychology. And that was really the start, if I'm honest, about sort of people analytics as it's known today. So while I was there, had a lot of internships, a lot of opportunities to explore the full IO space. I did things from organizational development to pretending to executive coach managers, to learning and development, training design, and all of that. One of the things I found myself doing, though, in all of these scenarios was looking for the data, trying to understand the impact. How do we know this is working? What are the outcomes, et cetera? And so through that, kind of got involved in surveying, engagement surveys, assessments, things like that, and really found that that's kind of where my passion was in the data, in the analysis, and in the assessment sort of measurement. So from there, I actually was fortunate to find an opportunity through actually a colleague I was working with at the time. He called me one day and kind of said, have you ever thought about doing anything in like metrics, and like I think they want someone who could do like workforce planning or like something like that, and this was at Barclays Capital, an investment bank in Manhattan, linked to the Barclays Bank out in London. And I was like, yeah, I mean, that sounds interesting. At the time I was doing more of that learning assessment and engagement stuff. And so got an opportunity at Barclays to be one of their first sort of metrics and analytics guys. And this was really early days. We were using business objects for our BI platform. We had 7 versions of PeopleSoft throughout the globe. So we were, this was really like, let's just take as many data files as we can, mash them up in Excel, then, start building databases in Access. So we were using Access, Microsoft Access for our database setup. And then connecting to that with business objects. We had a big group of business objects developers in London who were helping us. And I built what I called my sort of first talent intelligence platform, which ultimately was a performance management reporting and like dashboarding platform, but it was used throughout the company to essentially help managers get visibility into distributions, how that was relating to things like tenure and job level, et cetera, some of the really foundational components of what we would consider maybe metrics and reporting today. And then from there, I actually in New York met my future wife. And when we met, one of the first things she told me was, I've always wanted to live in San Francisco. And she's like, I don't think I'm going to be in New York too long. So just letting you know before we, get serious here. And light bulbs went on, and I was like, well, I'm from the Bay Area. My family would love it if I was back there. I had been in New York for 6 years, and 6 years in New York is a pretty long time. You either sort of commit and decide you're going to stay there for 10 to 15 more years, or you kind of jump ship. You've experienced it. You're tired. You're a little hardened. And so that was sort of the impetus to get back into the Bay Area, and then was able to get an opportunity at AAA to help start their first sort of workforce analytics team. Was there for 3 years, built out a small team there, and really started to dive into the real nuts and bolts of it. We were an early Visier customer. I remember we were one of their first 12, I think. Going
Wow.
to some of the early customer meetups, and there's 8 of us in a conference room as their like customer conference, talking about the roadmap and what they're going to be building and how they're going to be building it. So that was pretty exciting. And yeah, and then got a call from Atlassian, and hadn't actually heard of them, which seems to be common. People don't know about Atlassian, but then when you start learning about them, you realize they're having quite an impact within the IT space, and then general sort of collaboration and work management space. So all of my tech friends knew about Atlassian through Jira, which is ultimately what people sort of enter with if you're familiar with Atlassian, or you've heard one of our ads on NPR, which also seems to be common, at least in the Bay Area. People are like, Atlassian, I feel like,
Yeah,
yeah, Jira and Trello, right? Yeah. So yeah,
that worked.
that's been the journey. It's been, it seems pretty linear in some ways, but every step's been sort of a new experience and kind of honing, the path, I guess you could say.
Well, my reaction to all that, if I might say so, Blaine, is that I want to be you when I grow up.
I appreciate that.
it, it is it's a fantastic journey, and thank you for sharing. It's the case where neuroscience and positive psychology and basic self-help. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a book over my shoulder. I'm going to grab it. You may be familiar with it. Susan David, Emotional Agility. She is she works at Harvard, and she's top, I don't know, 100 management
Yeah.
influencer. And I also think of Amishi Jha, who wrote Peak Mind, and obviously Dan Pink, Brene Brown, Adam Grant. I think again, and the reason I list those authors is and influencers, thought leaders, they have created a lot of content with a lot of great ideas that apply, yes, to our personal lives, but they also apply in the workplace, in our work lives. And there is a significant gap between what is advocated and the insights of those authors and their work and the lived experience in the workplace. And one of my missions is actually to enable these great ideas and great insights to be adopted at scale. And so with that in mind, that's why I say you're kind of my hero, because you have the understanding of how the brain works. But I heard you say a couple times that you are a systems thinker, and that you understand how the dots not only connect looking backwards, but scenario plan on how they might connect moving forward, and being attentive to the data that is either generated or that needs to be generated that can generate greater insight so appropriate action can then ensue at an individual level, maybe team level, and organizational level. So that's probably the biggest leading question I've ever created in my life.
Yeah.
is this, how you look at things? And, when you kind of sell yourself, or maybe Atlassian found you, but I'm sure you went through a series of interviews.
Yeah.
How did you position yourself? What do you think your source of uniqueness is that you bring to your role as a people analytics leader?
Yeah. It's a great question. I think that, with that kind of systems approach, what you're looking at is, the data is sort of an outcome of that system. And so understanding that the employee experience um, is kind of interconnected from start to finish, and understanding that all of the components of that experience, whether it's your initial onboarding or manager changes, or you go out on leave and come back, those all kind of connect together to create, I think you said, your lived experience in the workplace. And so what I've tried to do, and what we're continuing to try to do, is understand how those workforce experiences really play with each other. Um, what are the impacts of them along the journey? A lot of folks join organizations, and the first year in this honeymoon phase, everything is awesome and exciting. And then they start getting more and more projects, and they might change a manager, and they may miss out on a promotion. And all of those things are shaping their experience while they're sort of in the organization, and there's data being collected during those experiences. And so the opportunity is really to connect the data together, right? I mean, I think I'm sort of saying it out loud, but essentially being able to tell that story of that experience of those employees, and how it then, to your point, impacts teams, is something that not a lot of people are doing. And I think also it really resonates as you talk about kind of how do I, sell myself, or what are the conversations that we're having. Um, a lot of times we're talking to folks who own a piece of the process, but it's very rare to have somebody really thinking across all of it. You might have the head of talent or the head of employee experience thinking about it, but everyone else is sort of working in their silos. And so to sort of bring that to the conversation and say, hey, these people over here are doing this work, and it's generating these, these insights or this data, and you're doing X. And if we bring that together, you can be doing more, they can be doing more, and we can all essentially be improving the environment for all Atlassians. And so I think that's kind of the where it comes together.
I think if you're listening, you don't see the big smile on my face because I I just want to highlight that and ask a question about how you make that happen, because there are those functional leaders, COE leads, whatever you want to say, that are very sometimes protective of their function, the associated technologies, the associated data. So, how to create trust and apply that systematic thinking in real time to assess trade-offs on what one function might do that would affect another. Was that a hard sell? Did it happen organically? Was that already in place? Can you speak to how
Yeah.
you enable this systematic thinking?
Yeah. And I will say, like, it's a constant kind of evolution, right? Like, we haven't solved it all for everybody, and we certainly are there's still tons of opportunity, but it has happened rather organically, as we really started with the data foundations, and ensuring that we are building a sort of integrated data warehouse that allows us to draw the connections. And so um, what when I say sort of organically, we just are seeking out opportunities in projects with our stakeholders to show that connection. So let's say, for example, I'm working with our head of talent, and we've just run a major program, whether for performance management process or promotion process or something like that, and we're evaluating the effectiveness of that. Now, a traditional sort of assessment would just look at that process and understand that process, and did it have the impact that we expected it to. We do that, and then we look at what are other sort of connections or opportunities for data that we can bring in to help round out the story. I'll just throw this out because my boss was having a conversation with another leader, and he used this analogy, and I thought it was is a very, very good analogy. He's talking about a particular program that's right now kind of running in a silo. And he said, it's giving me good information, but I feel like I'm looking through a straw. And like if you think about that, like here's the world, right? But like what he sees is this little piece of it, and that's all that's given to him, right? And so that's what happens when we keep it in a silo. But if we take those processes and even bring, in the talent example, if we even bring in the some basic stuff like how the promotion process, impacted org shape, and what we know about org shape and spans of control, and what the impact of that might be on attrition. Or if they can link it to then the business strategy and say, so while our engineering organization is trying to do X, Y, and Z as a result of this process, it has such impact on sort of this part of the business talent strategy, which is bigger than just the promotion process or the performance process. And you start doing that, and you bring those insights, and the head of talent or whoever it is, sort of you see some light bulbs going off, and they ask more questions, and they want to know more information. And oh, what other data do we have? I never thought about it like that. What other questions could we answer? And it really starts a conversation, and you kind of just move along that way.
May I highlight something there? Because what I'm hearing you say is that you are true partners with your internal customers slash
Yeah,
stakeholders, whatever you call them, insofar as that you're not doing the big aha, you're not selling what you're producing, that they are co-creators in what you're producing. Is that a fair
yeah,
statement?
yeah. We actually have a formal, like a somewhat formal process in a lot of our analyses that it's called collaborative analysis. And so what we do is we bring initial findings to the stakeholders, and sort of, to your point, kind of co-create the story and understanding. And this is particularly useful when we're looking at qualitative data, because what we actually do is we bring in the stakeholders into the qualitative data analysis. So they are helping us. They are also maybe reading comments and organizing themes and thinking about the topics that are coming out of this. One, it helps to sort of get their buy-in, bring them along, but also they have unique insights to bring from their own sort of SME standpoint, to help sort of round out the story of what we're hearing. Because, us in the people analytics space, we may read some comments and put them into a particular bucket that sounds right to us, but we don't have as much context into the existing processes, the plans, the strategies, what's already being done. And so those SMEs can really co-analyze, co-create with us. So it's a pretty cool experience.
I, I got chills. I get chills a lot. It's a warm day. I don't have no reason to get
Beautiful
chills.
Hispanic.
But hey, I'll tell you, collaborative analysis is something that's going to
Yeah.
stick with me. And the fact that you said it's
Mhm.
semi-structured, I assume that people know what that is that they're entering into a way of doing things that has a level of familiarity, thus trust and practice. It's not something that they're doing as a
Yep.
one-off. It's a way of doing things. Is
Yeah,
that
yeah,
fair?
it's built into our plan, our scheduling, our roadmap, et cetera. Whenever we're, endeavoring on we do that mostly. The qual stuff usually is in like research projects. So when we're doing interviews or any kind of like user testing or anything like that.
Well, there are a bunch of themes that I
Yeah,
want to talk about, today, and I want to talk about the CHRO perspective and leaders, and we're touching on that a little bit right
yeah.
now. But before we go further, I really was taken by what you shared on the beach the other day. Don't hate us. Was work management for all as a North Star for you all there at Atlassian. And, I was just like, I literally, just my head just
Yeah, yeah,
went nuts. So can you explain what that is and why it's such a priority to not only what you're doing in the people analytics discipline, but as an organization?
Yeah, definitely. So the way that we're thinking about work management for all is that, we have it was actually, I was watching one of a keynote recently about some recent releases of some products that we have in this space. But it is, you think about how we have all of these apps for our life, right? And you have the App Store, and I think there's the Apple coined the term. There's an app for that. So now in the workplace, that's becoming true as well. There's an app for everything. I jotted down a stat that if you're an organization over 2,000 people, on average, there are 187 apps that you engage with or that your company has sort of in their portfolio of apps that they are using to help the organization get work done. And so when they think about work management for all, it really is, how do you manage all of the work that's happening across the organization, across teams, across individuals, and how do you bring all of that work together into a single platform or source of truth to allow for visibility into the work that's happening, to allow for collaboration into the work that's happening, and to just allow for better collaboration as all of these projects are spinning up. And so not to turn this into a pitch for Atlassian, but we just released a product called Atlas that really aims to do this and really connects all of these apps together to provide sort of an integrated environment where individuals and teams of any kind of teams, not just functional teams, but we're talking, and Atlassian is all about teams. Our mission is to unleash the potential of every team. And so we take this concept of teams very seriously. And it is one of the most like hotly debated topics within our organization on a regular basis. What is a team? How do you define a team? What team are you on? What does it mean to be on multiple teams? Do you have a primary team, et cetera? I mean, we can go on. We can have a podcast about teams. But ultimately, what it comes down to is that teams are fluid and teams are forming and all the time. And they're what's the word? Whatever, they're separating. Can't think of the word, but essentially they're assembling and disassembling all the time. And so this space gives you an opportunity to highlight those teams, the work the teams are doing, and because Atlassian is sort of open by default, open company, no BS is our one of our values. We we basically have this platform with Atlas that allows for pure visibility across the organization. I can go see what our engineering team is working on. I can see what our product team is working on, et cetera. And then the opportunity there from a people analytics standpoint is huge. All of a sudden, we have data on all of the work happening in the organization, who's working with who, how they are working, what they're working on, and then as we think about overlaying um, other sort of product data, we're looking at, we have Slack interactions, we have, and we're not doing this yet, but this is sort of the vision because Atlas has just kind of rolled out. But we've got Jira interactions. People are collaborating in Jira. We have Confluence, which at Atlassian is like our core collaboration tool. So we don't use email. We have Slack for sort of quick back and forth. But if you want to brainstorm on a topic, or you want to, create sort of a shared document that you're going to bring to, your executive team, you go into Confluence, you can co-edit within Confluence, and you can essentially sort of in real time or async, essentially develop the content you need for the work that you're doing. All of that is interactions, right? All of that is who's working with who, how often are they connecting, how much time are they spending together, and then what is that ultimately producing, and what's the impact of that? And so as we think about work management for all and the growth of that space, it's really taking, how engineering teams and development teams have worked together for so long um, through sort of the agile manifesto and the sort of the ways these software teams work is so, what's the word, like it's so collaborative and so connected, and they have rhythms, they have rituals, they have ways of working that they define like very clearly. And those types of activities are not really used well outside of those software teams. And so it's really about how do we bring that rigor of teamwork, of collaboration, and all of that into the rest of the organization. And that's that sort of going from like technical work to just everybody work. So that's why we call it work management for all, right? Everybody's doing work. It's not just the technical teams, and sort of bringing that ethos into, you know, HR and finance, et cetera.
So I got another chill. So that's two chills. You might break my chill record. It's I mean, there's
So much.
so much to highlight there, and what I want to focus on is this, because if I'm listening, I'm going, okay,
Right.
that's cool, but I'm not a
Yeah.
tech company, and my team might be
Yeah.
different. I don't want to go there yet.
Yeah.
We can come back to that, but what I want to highlight and ask you about, and if anyone has heard me speak or listen to this podcast for any period of time, you've heard me say this before. Cite a Chinese
Mm.
proverb: "The beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names." And what I heard you say is that you're spending time actually defining what a team
Yeah.
is. And we can talk about defining people analytics, workforce planning, all that stuff. But what I really want to focus on in our conversation today is the fact that, in my view, as a discipline, not only in people analytics, but organizationally, we have not defined the work
Mm.
very well. In some cases, very
Yeah.
poorly. And increasingly, we have the data, thus ability to define the work better. So when we talk about workforce planning, when we talk about hiring, talent acquisition, when we talk about org design, all these things, how good are we at defining the work in the first place, and then consciously allocating that work to who's best suited to get it done at that point in time, and whether it be an employee,
Yeah.
contractor, outsource provider, robotic automation, AI, all these ways in which work can get done, but that's all predicated on defining the work. So with that as the stage, I mean, how are you looking at work? And is that something that you're working on, defining the work itself so you can make these conscious decisions?
Interesting question. Yeah, that's a for myself personally and our team. Um, it is also kind of an always evolving challenge. What we what we do today in terms of defining the work and making sure that kind of, I think we talked too about like priorities and things like that, and making sure we're working on the right things and making sure it's clear that we know what we're working on. Other people sort of understand as well. Is one, and I don't know if this is going to answer the question, but we'll see. We sort of we start with kind of the broader strategy. So what are we trying to accomplish as an organization, and not just from an HR lens, but from a business lens. Who is trying to get this work done? What are the functions and teams that are most important to getting this work done? And then from there, kind of stepping back into how can we contribute to these goals, challenges, sort of business problems as a team. And we do at times start with skill set. So we'll do two things. One is, here are all the projects that we could do, but it's also, here's who we have on the team to do it. And so there needs to be alignment there. So we're not going to try to do something we don't have the necessary resources for. Though if it is absolutely critical, we can certainly bring a proposal to the leadership team to get resourcing if necessary. But ultimately, it comes down to then getting clear on the goals of the organization, what they're trying to accomplish, what we know and what we can do. If we're thinking about workforce planning or something like that, right? A lot of these terms have a lot of, we talk about just like they have a lot of baggage. So like everyone has some definition in their head about what it is. And so that's an exercise too in and of itself, is defining, okay, so we are going to do this thing that we're calling workforce planning. What does that mean? How do we define that, right? And so actually in our sort of project layout, if you will, we have a template that's used across the organization. We call it a project poster. And this project poster, so this is just another sort of plug, but like Atlassian has something we call the Atlassian playbook. And it is literally this playbook for getting work done within a team. And it's public. So you go to like Atlassian.com/team playbook, something like that. Um, and it has these plays that you can run to help you define the work, to help you get past roadblocks, to help you make decisions when you're at an impasse, to kind of help team formation, et cetera. And so in this project poster, we essentially go through this ritual of defining the problem. What do we know about that problem today? What don't we know and still need to gather? What does success look like? How do we define success? And we work on that project poster with our stakeholders. So that helps us, to your point, around clarifying the work and getting clear on what it is we're actually going to be doing. We kind of go through this process as the first step of any project, sort of get that buy-in. Then we have a kickoff meeting where we get everyone together. And we also, in that process, this is something that is unique. I think for me, it's unique to Atlassian. I was blown away when I first joined Atlassian that this is the way that they work. But I joined, and in true Atlassian fashion, on my second day, I was handed our engagement survey, which actually wasn't originally in scope for my job. I was going to be focused on metrics, analytics, data, et cetera. Employee surveying, I have lots of history with. I was running the survey at AAA, but that wasn't technically in scope. So on the second day, I'm handed the employee survey. It's been passed around HR. Nobody really owns it. We're still a relatively small company. And they're like, can you take this over? And by the way, it launches in 4 weeks. I'm like, and so, I came from a slower organization, insurance. My history was in banking and healthcare and all of that stuff. So like to run an employee engagement survey, you got like a 3-month lead time. You've got to prepare comms and get all the data structures right and all these things. It's evolved quite a bit since then. This was 6 years ago, but and I said, okay, just me? And my boss at the time said, no. Who do you need? What kind of people do you need on your team to make this successful? And I was like, well, I'll probably need some project management support. I need some comms support. I'm still learning the data. Do we have anyone who knows the data, et cetera? And it was like, put these names on this page, ping them, tell them you need their support in this project. Here's what you're doing. And within a week, we had a project team spun up across the people team, and we were running, and we delivered, and it became sort of one of my proudest sort of products at the organization in the first 3 or 4 years. But that's still how we work. So it's sort of, who do you need? What do you need today to get this work done? What skill sets, et cetera? Reach out to leaders, essentially say, here's what we're doing. Here's what we need. Is there anyone on your team who might have some capacity? And really opening up the organization, and it's really that true cross-functional collaboration. And so that's part of kind of spinning up that work, getting that project going, and essentially gaining clarity on what it is that we're trying to solve before we do anything else.
Yeah, I love it. And thank you for sharing, because you know the work, you know the nature of the work. Like,
Yeah.
you grew up with the work. So you would have a very clear understanding of what's required. So you could detail it, and thus you could find resources internally if they weren't available. I imagine if there was budget, you could
Yeah.
go, external. It's a great example. Then it invites the question, let's say in that scenario, there's a technology disruption, something can be automated. And one of those individuals can, as much as I hate to say it out loud, be replaced by a automated solution. And then how does that affect the math and prioritization? And so I'm just,
Yeah. Yeah.
before I
Yeah.
let you respond, I just want to highlight that most organizations and industries, particularly with COVID, have gone through these massive
Yeah. Yeah.
disruptions. And you talk about digital transformation. There's been workforce disruptions, and all of this is affecting prioritization, thus the work, and thus how the work can get done. So I love where you're going
Yeah.
with this, and so I just want to land this because we could talk about this
Yeah. Yeah.
theme
Yeah.
all day, but it is something that, as I, throwing my own bias, think about the future
Yeah.
of work and the future of people analytics and
Mhm.
workforce planning, I see us getting to this level of detail about, okay, this is the work, and then
Right.
how do we do it? Because, and this is
Yeah.
where I wanted to segue to, and you and I have talked about this, is that there's a lot of attention to
Yeah.
skills, which you just highlighted. Okay, do we have the people,
Yeah.
the capability? However, people are all constrained by time. So we have a capacity constraint, and time is fixed for us given our perception, but it is variable insofar as that we all have certain demands being
Mhm.
placed on us, whether it be a child at home, like I know you and
Yeah.
your wife have,
Children.
or
Yeah.
children, childs, is that a word? Um, or elder care,
Yeah.
or what have you. So my pointed question is, how are you looking at that, capacity constraints, and how does that affect your workforce planning or team formation and the allocation of
It's a
work?
great question. I think right now, yeah, automation is a big topic for sure. And the way that we are thinking about that component and um, the how the work is going to evolve is that we want to essentially automate. Well, we want to automate as much as we can to free up our employees' capacity to think, to give them time to be strategic, to give them time to do more value add work that can really move the needle on whatever direction we're going on. And so that's one component, is where automation isn't replacing people, but it is replacing, to your, I think maybe not quite skills, but it's replacing tasks. It's replacing activities that take too much time and ultimately um, are not as value add as um, let's, things that are uniquely human. And maybe that will start to change too, right, as AI improves and we get more advanced with machine learning and all of that. But um, at the moment, the real focus is on removing tasks so people have more time to think and to do better work. So, we hire amazing people. That's an assumption we make from the beginning. If you are at Atlassian, you are smart, you are creative, you're values driven, and so we want you to do your best work. And you can't do your best work if you're doing things that can be automated. Is sort of the assumption. And so, in terms of growth and workforce planning, um, interestingly for us, we're not necessarily thinking about kind of fewer people because we can automate. We're fortunate enough to be in a position where we're scaling, dramatically and continuing to add headcount. And so when we think about workforce planning, we're thinking about that strategic value and where do we need to be putting people who can help us ultimately realize that vision. Um, and so the the product evolution um, is a big component of that. How do we continue to innovate in the product space, and how do we continue to create, like, evolve our current products and create new products that help teams work together more effectively? And so um, if our money can be used to bring in the best talent to innovate, create, and put the every bit of energy that's available in their minds to the big problems, then that's a better use of those funds for sure.
Yeah, I love it. And yeah, I will say that historically the allocation of work has been at the
Mm.
manager level. However, a leadership team can create systems and processes that create the basis for the wise
Mhm.
allocation of work. Is that a fair statement? Is that what you're trying to enable,
Mhm.
the wise distribution and allocation of work at scale?
It's certainly, I will say we are in that evolution right now because we've grown relatively fast and we're going to continue to. And um, I would say we are still putting too much on our managers. Like, you know, they are,
Mm.
especially in COVID times, and even as we move into just more pure kind of hybrid work, um, the demands are increasing. And so some of the things that we're looking at, if we think about just even from our product space, um, we have tools that allow for a lot of asynchronous work, and so you don't need there's not an expectation that you're on late calls with people on the other side of the world, right? That can be recorded. We can put documentation into Confluence. You can provide updates into Jira. And then when your manager gets online, they can just read that, ask questions within those tools, and get feedback whenever you come online. And so that certainly helps with that workload. The bigger issue right now, I would say, is more of like the change management and the behavior change that needs to happen with that,
Mm.
because FaceTime is still important, and that connection you get with individuals when you are engaging. What we talk about now is more of that like intentional togetherness, is what we call it, to sort of feed that. Um, and so to sort of relieve the more administrative aspects for the manager, it certainly comes down to those sort of productivity tools, if you want to, call them that, or the work management tools. So I think that is directionally what we're working towards.
Well, Blaine, there's so much that I would like to continue not only to discuss, but to acknowledge your ruthless
Yeah, yeah,
prioritization that we talked about. But before, I want to cover a
yeah,
couple few more topics before we wrap. And so we got probably 10 minutes or so. But I want to go back
yeah,
to the CHRO leadership team and take you out of Atlassian for a minute, although if you want to reference your experience there, by all means. But it's this, is that most leaders inside and outside of HR have not grown up with people analytics. They might say they did, but what is possible today wasn't possible 12, 18 months ago. And certainly the evolution over the last 20 years has, I don't know if you'll agree with
yeah,
this, it's damn near been exponential. So, we've crawled a little bit, we've
yeah,
started walking, and now, at least from my vantage point, we're
yeah,
running pretty fast. And so how to stay up to date and aware of what's possible. We have talent intelligence technology that are looking at talent market data. We obviously are able to do more across the employee experience, look into our recruiting activities and be more efficient and effective there. So my question is, if I am a CHRO or someone who's commissioning this work, what would you say that they need to consider to build a sustainable capability? And I'll just tee it up
yeah,
with one more little anecdote. I've seen too often, because there's a gross undersupply of
yeah,
talent in the people analytics space, that I'm just going to take somebody
mhm, yeah,
from IT or finance or hire a data scientist or IO psychologist and say, okay, you come in
yeah,
and do your
yeah,
magic. Good luck. But they're under resourced, they're underappreciated, they don't have the
yeah.
relationship equity. So, with that as the staging, how would you coach a CHRO to, again, build a sustainable capability in this area?
I think that there are a couple paths to take. One, ultimately, I would say in order to build the sustainable program, you need it's simple. Well, I think everyone says it, but you do need to start with the data, um, and so data foundations are really the building blocks to unleashing all of the potential. So you can either do that through partnering internally with, say, if you have a data team, product data, business data, something like that. Um, they know how to combine data sets. They know how to. Now they don't have the HR sort of SME expertise, which is also extremely critical. So, in theory, you also, I guess I'll make a lot of assumptions about the current state of the CHRO and the organization, but they probably have an HRIS and they probably have some tech support or admin for that HRIS. So, that person needs to be heavily involved. They are not the person to do the data foundation work, but they're the person to sort of consult and inform on how are things structured, why are things named certain ways, where can I find X. Um, but that data foundation then sets the stage for sort of the future growth of the organization, for the people analytics program. And then I would say start small. So um, I've learned through failures and experience, that because this is new for a lot of organizations, it's new for a lot of leaders. Um, Starting with the basics are really important. We're kind of, we're doing things like that even today with new leaders and with new programs of work, is sort of starting with the foundations and starting with the basics. So, your head count, your attrition, your, makeup of the organization, and just have people starting to sort of consume that, even if it's in reports or, in a document or something. It's about kind of building over time that awareness and understanding of what the data is. So then, when you do want to start doing something more advanced, you want to start doing some statistics or combining data, people have that foundational understanding of the components that are going into those more advanced visualizations or analyses, et cetera. Um, so yeah, I would say, starting with the data foundations, and again, yeah, so internally or externally, there are platforms that can help you do it. There are teams within your company who might be able to help. And yeah, and then starting small, but also starting with the business. I think that's also something I've learned over time, is um, your business leaders are going to be your biggest fans if you bring them along in the journey early and you have them as part of the process, because they care as much as you do about their people and about their teams. They want their organization to succeed. They're not just focused on building X, right? Like, they know that it won't happen if they don't have the right people in there and if they don't have good, strong, high performing talent. And so I think, that would be the beginning from my perspective.
And just to play that back,
Yeah.
it sounds like if you're going to hire somebody to do that, or elevate somebody internally, going back to what you shared earlier, they
Yeah.
have to understand the work, and they have to understand the means, the options in which that work
Yeah.
can get done. Because as you mentioned before, it's not only collaborating with your key internal customers or stakeholders, it's identifying the solutions that are going to meet those priorities at scale,
Yeah.
at speed, over time. And so being an educated shopper, I guess I don't want
Yeah.
to put words in your mouth, but would you advocate for that as well, as, being a wise decision maker in terms of what technologies and solutions and partners that you take on?
Yeah. 100%. And I would say, just not to sort of go on about it, but bring the business along with you. So,
Mhm.
maybe start with key stakeholders, but definitely don't make those decisions in a silo,
Mhm.
because they will be your customers, they will be your users, and they will be as invested as you are. So,
And I'm going to you can slap me on the wrist, or I can owe you a beer. It's
Yeah,
we have to understand, or CHROs and the like have to understand that this doesn't come for free. Since you spent, a million plus implementation of X, doesn't all of a
yeah,
sudden mean that you have analytics and workforce planning in place. That
right.
this there is a check that has to be written, and that check, if you want additional insights, you're going to have to write it. Is that
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I think that what you're alluding to too, maybe, and what I would say is, you, to your point, you can't just buy a system and solve the problem. You do need people who can help deliver that, bring that to the business or to your HR teams to understand it, to dissect it, to basically analyze it in the context of the problems they're trying to solve. And to your point about the work, understanding that um, the impact that that has on the work that individuals are doing on a day-to-day basis. And so, those, we call them analytics business partners, whatever you want to call them, but you need people to help you interpret, understand, and take action on the information coming out of those systems. Because it's not going to solve, it's like an AI system that spits out a recommendation. Like, you can't just take that and go solve all your problems. You've got to understand it. You have to be able to take it into context and all of that. So,
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
thank you for saying that. Thank you for sharing. And as we start to wrap, I have one more question.
Okay.
Uh, as we look to the future and our ability to do so much, with the data,
Yeah.
what are your hopes or concerns, about particularly the next, 12, 24 months? What do you see happening, or what do you go like, oh my gosh, I hope that doesn't happen?
Yeah. You said future. I'm like 10 years out.
Yeah, yeah.
You said 12 to 20. But yeah, I mean, a lot can change in even 12 to 24 months. Um, so I would say, something for me that I'm really excited about is bringing um, making all of this data consumable for the employees. I think we do put too much on our leaders. We put too much on our managers to solve all of the problems within the organization. Um, Individuals are committed, are focused, are they want to do their best work, and I think the opportunity we have in front of us is giving them the insights and the data that they need to be successful on a day-to-day basis, not data to their manager to tell them how to be successful, but actually enabling the individual to sort of own their career, own their future, etc. I think that's directionally a key area I want to focus on, and I think is going to be really exciting as we start to combine all of this workforce data with all of our tooling. It's something we're in a unique position at Atlassian to bring this data into the products and tools you use on a daily basis just to get your work done. Um,
3 chills, Blaine. 3 chills. That's the third chill.
and then fears, you know, I think that, well, one fear is that people analytics teams continue to spin on projects that aren't having an impact, and that, you know, my fear is that a lot of groups are still um, working towards really delivering that value that people analytics can deliver. And it's hard, and we're still learning. But that's one thing. Like, there is so much potential, but it's complicated. Like, it's not easy. And I want to see a lot of sort of growth in this space because there is all of that potential. Um, I was going to say something around kind of like AI and ML and all of that stuff and data privacy. And um, I have a feeling like I feel like we're figuring that out. And I have a feeling that that's not, as scary as it looked like it was going to be 2 years ago. And so, that's something that I'm, excited about, and sort of opening the conversation with employees. about, owning their data and making decisions for themselves, et cetera. So, yeah, that's just an addition to the hopes.
No, thank you for bringing that up. And I have to say that I agree.
Yeah,
I am I'm hopeful in that regard.
yeah,
And the legislation is catching up a little bit.
yeah,
I like that Europe is taking the lead personally. But yeah, before we go into that, which would be a whole nother
yeah,
podcast,
yeah,
we will wrap. So as we do that, how can people learn more about you and what you're doing there at Atlassian?
yeah. Just connect on LinkedIn. I'd love to sort of learn more about what everyone's up to. And so Blaine Ames at LinkedIn. I don't know my actual address, but you can find me. Pretty easy to find, I think.
All right, well, we'll put it in the comments. And yeah, hey, thanks for sharing, and look forward to not only talking soon, but see you and your family on the beach before too
Sounds
long.
good.
So,
All right.
all right,
For
you
the
be
time.
well. All right,
Appreciate it.
thank you.
See you.
Cheers. Thank you for listening today. If you want to learn more about today's guest, go to pafal.net. You'll be able to see links to the bio as well as to the video of today's program. You'll also have the chance to support this podcast and other shows that we do by becoming a Pafal community member. You can also donate if you choose. What will be helpful to support Pafal, the People Data for Good Movement, and me will be to share this episode with friends and coworkers and others who might find it valuable. Finally, for updates on upcoming episodes, shows, and events, please subscribe to our newsletter at pafal.net. At the bottom, you can also see our social media presence. So please subscribe to our company page on LinkedIn, follow us on YouTube, Twitter, and Instagram. We're active as can be, and we want to provide this content to you that is timely, relevant, and actionable. So again, thank you for listening today, and hope to see you soon. I also want to give a shout out to Jenna Dern, Malaz El Sheikh, and Sarah Sparnan, who without them, this show would not happen. And now go out and make some great things happen.